benefits. And that's got to be dealt with. And what we're doing to Medicare makes that problem worse, not better. Medicaid, it's the largest expense in my state. It's a matching program. So listen to this if you're out there on a Sunday with nothing else to do, but listen to me. If you don't live in Nebraska, here's what's coming your way. Your state is going to be required to cover more people under Medicaid because the eligibility, I think, goes up to 133% above poverty, which is an increase over the current system. So throughout the nation, there are going to be thousands of more people enrolled into Medicaid. And every state except one is going to have to come up with matching money. I have 12% unemployment in South Carolina. My state's on its knees. I have 31% African-American population in South Carolina. How did they get the 60th vote? It was the weekend before Christmas and there were one vote short. Well, here's what they did to get that one vote. They had a deal cooked up that no one knew about but the two people talking. There was no input from anybody other than the majority leader and the senator from Nebraska. And after that meeting was over, they come up with a 380-page amendment to a 2,000-page bill. They file it yesterday. We make them read it hear about it for the first time yesterday. The majority leader fills up the tree so that there is no ability by any Republican or Democrat to amend their work product. And this is a transparent new way of doing business. You cook up a deal in a back room that is essentially sleazy, in my view, to allow one state to be held harmless for Medicare enrollees to get that vote and make the rest of us go home and say, why can't you in South Carolina and Georgia get that deal? What kind of senator are you? Well, I tell you, this kind of senator we are, we're not going to do that. We're not going to put the whole nation at risk and take a broken system and make it worse just to get a vote. No way in hell. Abortion. You either for it or against it, you're indifferent to it. You can be whatever you want to be on abortion and be just as good American as I am. I'm pro-life and proud of it. Most of us in America, whether you're pro-choice or pro-life, don't want our federal taxpayer dollars to be used to pay for abortions. For 32 years, the Hyde Amendment has been the law of the land, preventing taxpayer dollars to be used for abortion. Well, in this health care reform, guess what? That's exactly what's going to happen. There's a brave Democrat in the Congress, Bart Stupak, from a blue state, who stood up to his Democratic leadership and said, I will not vote for a bill that allows federal taxpayer dollars in the form of subsidies to be used to fund abortion because I find that morally offensive, and I think most Americans agree with me. He brought the House to its knees, saying, you will not pass this bill to use federal dollars to fund abortion. What did he get out of it? Nothing. Not one thing for Wisconsin. He got out of that deal the pride of knowing that he stood up for the unborn. The bill comes to the Senate. Senator Nelson from Nebraska tries to introduce the Stupak language that would be an absolute bar from using your taxpayer dollars to fund abortion. He lost that amendment. He said he could not vote for a bill that would allow taxpayer dollars to be used to fund abortion. He gets in a room with Senator Reid, and he comes up with a compromise, and he claims it solves the problem. Well, the problem is that his claim is not accepted by all those who follow this, that the compromise he has achieved on abortion is a miserable failure. Congressman Stupak says it's unacceptable. The National Right to Life Committee says it's unacceptable. The Nebraska Right to Life Committee says it's unacceptable. The Council of Catholic Bishops says it's unacceptable. There's not one pro-life group in this country believes that Senator Nelson protected the rights of the unborn. Now, how in good conscience do you vote for a bill when that was a big issue? At the end of the day, one last thought. This bill would make an Enron accountant blush. They're talking about how it lowers the deficit by $132 billion. But they don't tell you that the $247 billion doctor fix is not in the bill. What am I saying? Over the next 10 years, doctors under the 1997 balanced budget agreement will have $247 billion taken out of their practice unless Congress acts. Since 1997, Congress every year has stepped up to the plate and forgiven that cut, which is double digits. Everybody knows we're going to do that. But when it came to health care reform, they left the doctor fix out because if you include it, it no longer is revenue neutral. It doesn't prevent the deficit. It no longer does what they say. They say it cuts the deficit by $132 billion, but if you include the $247, it runs up the deficit in the first 10 years. In the second 10 years, it adds $2 trillion to the deficit. Long story short, this is what Enron did. People went to jail for doing this in the private sector. They took the liabilities of the company and they hid them, making the balance sheet look better than it actually is. So when they tell you this reduces the deficit by $132 billion, they took out a liability that they know we're going to fund just to cook the books. If this is going to be okay for the country, then we have no hope as a nation of ever solving any hard problem. And I just would like to say to my colleagues, I know you want to be home. I know everybody on the other side wants to be home. I know you want to find ways to solve hard problems. People in Afghanistan want to be home too. At least they're away from home for a noble purpose. We're up here trying to stop a legislative process that if it becomes legitimate, if this becomes the okay way of doing business, giving one senator a deal you won't give anybody else and put the whole country at risk just to get that vote, then I hope the American people will rise up in righteous indignation and throw us all out, because nobody should be representing the country this way.
You know, the senator from South Carolina raises a point about there being this bill being revenue neutral, and it actually decreases the deficit. Well, how do they achieve that? They achieve that through some truly Enron accounting, as the senator from South Carolina just said. And here's what happens. There is a certain amount of money that is projected by CBO to be generated in insurance premiums being paid by young individuals across this country under what's called the Class Act. The Class Act is a new Medicare, new health care generated program, a new entitlement program that's included in this bill. And what it says is that it's going to provide long-term care benefits for young, healthy Americans who ultimately are going to become invalid and need that long-term care. Well, the fallacy in the numbers game that's being played here is that they are saying, CBO is saying that it is true that there will be a projection that we're going to say will generate a projection that they're saying we're going to generate premiums from these young people who are not going to be entitled to the benefits under this bill for 20, 30, 40 years from now. But even CBO recognizes that when these benefits begin being paid out, there's going to be an entitlement created that's going to blow the budget of this particular new program all the way out the top. In fact, the chairman of the Budget Committee, a Democrat from North Dakota who I admire and respect so much, has even said that this particular provision in this bill is a Ponzi scheme. It's something that Bernie Madoff would love. And yet, here we are with straight faces on the other side of the aisle coming in and saying we're really going to reduce the deficit by passing this provision called the Class Act. Beyond me how anybody with that straight face can say that that is actually a fact.
Would Senator yield?
Absolutely.
Isn't it true that's what's wrong with Social Security today, where we've spent it for years and years rather than putting it in a trust fund, and now that the baby boomers are going, the money's not there?
Exactly.
Isn't that the same thing?
You are exactly right, and exactly the same situation with Medicare.
And one other question, just to follow up on this fiscal part that the Senator from South Carolina brought. It's also still true that the taxes begin in 11 days on this bill, January 1st of 2010, but the benefits began January 1st of 2014. And in that score of the first 10 years of cost, you've got 4 years of program that aren't costing anything while you're raising revenue. So it's a ruse and a masking of the actual financial fiscal effect on the United States of America.
Now, the only way that Senator Reid could get the score that he kept going back and forth with Congressional Budget Office on was to make sure that the taxes started immediately, and they will. He's increased taxes by $26 billion to come up with a proposal he says is revenue neutral. That's an additional $26 billion, so it makes it a total of $518.5 billion in new taxes that are going to be paid by hardworking tax-paying Americans. And no benefits under this bill are going to start accruing until the year 2014.
My friend yield for.
Absolutely.
I just asked senior senator from Georgia, you remember this statement by President Obama. He said he won't sign a plan that adds one dime to our deficits either now or in the future, period. Yet David Broder, perhaps one of the most respected journalists here in Washington, D.C., who's been around a long time, he said he's talked to all the experts, and everybody he's talked to said that these bills as they stand are budget busters. And of course, I'm sure the senator also remembers a Washington Post ABC poll that said that 66% of those who responded to the poll think that this bill will make the deficit worse, not better. In other words, we got a credibility problem between what is being promised here by the president and presumably by the proponents of this bill and the American people, because they simply don't buy it. They don't believe it. Maybe that's why that earlier number from the Rasmussen poll said that a majority of Americans don't want us to pass this bill, but rather want us to start over and take a step-by-step or incremental approach.
Well, there's just no question but what the American people understand this. They get it. When we talk about cutting Medicare by $450 billion, do they really not think that the quality of care under Medicare is going to be diminished? Of course it is. Do the American people really think that we're not going to have an increase in the deficit when we're going to have almost $1 trillion bill in real live dollars that's going to be passed by this body in the next couple of days in all probability? Sure, the American people get that. They know that this is going to increase the cost of health care and it's going to increase the deficit, and that's why they're opposed to this.
Oh, would the senator yield for another question?
Sure.
Let's talk about the Class Act a little bit more. It is a new program that doesn't exist today where the federal government, as I understand it, will be offering long-term health care insurance to the American people. It's a voluntary program at first, just like everything else around here. Guess who's going to sign up? It's called adverse selection. The sickest people in the country are going to sign up. Under the bill, as it's written, it's just like what Senator Isaacson said about the underlying bill. You collect taxes for 10 years, you pay out benefits for 6. That's the way you get the money to make the numbers come out right. Well, guess what happens in the Class Act, this new program no one's heard much about? You start collecting premiums in 2011, but you don't pay any benefits to 2016. Guess what happens? That generates $73 billion of money to be used to say to the American people this bill is paid for. But when you ask the CBO about what happens after 2016, they say by 2029, I think it is, the whole thing falls apart. Because the only people in the program are the sickest folks, because it's a voluntary program, and at the end of the day, you've created a new entitlement, and everybody in this body is going to be rushing to subsidize premiums and get more people into this system. It will be another entitlement that grows, and CBO says it will be a death blow to our fiscal soundness. So I would ask the senator from Georgia, when Senator Conrad, who we all respect, said this is a giant Ponzi scheme that Bernie Madoff would have been proud of, do you think that's what he meant? You collect premiums and you make it look like you have money you really don't have, and you put off paying out benefits. And at the end of the day, would the senator agree with me? I've got a letter from October 23rd, 2009 from Senator Conrad, Landrieu, Lincoln, Warner, Lieberman, Bayh, and Nelson to the majority leader saying, please take the Class Act out of the bill. Would the senator agree that the Class Act is still in the bill and that anybody who votes to send this off to the president to become law has become a co-conspirator to the giant Ponzi scheme?
I don't think there's any question about that. Senator's exactly right, and it's what we call in Washington fuzzy math. Utilization of money from one pocket